At least 4 people have been killed in overnight missile attacks on the city of Kherson in Ukraine's south. And these are the worst strikes the region has seen since it was liberated 2 weeks ago. And the targets were not military installations, but homes and commercial buildings. Ukrainian forces had warned of an escalation in Kherson as Russian troops dug in across the Dnipro River. Well, satellite images released by NASA give some idea of the damage inflicted on Ukrainian infrastructure by that Russian bombing. Here's a nighttime view of Eastern Europe on the 6th of February. That's a few weeks before Russia invaded. And you can see the Ukrainian capital there in the middle. Now, compare that with this image, which was taken yesterday, the 24th of November. As you can see, nighttime Kyiv is now barely visible. And even though there are no borders on this image, you can still recognise Ukraine's silhouette. But the city is in darkness. Ukrainian authorities are struggling to restore power and water supplies knocked out in Russian strikes earlier this week.
Ukraine's energy grid is on the brink of collapse. The capital, Kyiv, has gone dark. Authorities say only half the country's energy needs are being met after the latest Russian strikes on Ukraine's infrastructure. As temperatures plummet well below freezing, authorities have set up thousands of so-called invincibility centres. Here, people can get warm, charge their phones and find hot beverages.
It's the second day we're without power and food. More than 60 children are waiting for food, and we can't prepare anything unless the power gets fixed.
Russia's campaign against Ukraine's power grid is seen by many as retaliation for battlefield losses. Moscow acknowledges attacking basic infrastructure, saying its aim is to reduce Ukraine's military capabilities and push it to negotiate. Kyiv accuses Russia of weaponizing winter and trying to freeze the country into submission. But rather than breaking Ukraine's spirit, these attacks are fueling resolve and anger across the country. The way they fight and target civil infrastructure, it can cause nothing but fury. If they expect us to fall on our knees and crawl to them, it won't happen.
Let our windows go dark, but we will not be in Russia. This hatred is for generations to come.
As the snow sets in, Ukraine remains defiant. But for the millions now living without power and water, this is only the beginning of a long, dark winter.
Our correspondent Nick Connolly is in the Ukrainian capital. Welcome, Nick. Let's start with these overnight strikes on Kherson and the clashes in the east.
Well, Kherson, basically since it was retaken by Ukrainian forces 2 weeks ago, is now the biggest frontline city. You've got the Russian troops just a few kilometers away on the other bank of the Dnipro River. So basically everywhere within Kherson is definitely within range of Russian artillery. And when we were there in the first few days after the Ukrainians had returned, you could hear bangs in the distance, but people were kind of not really paying much attention. They were just desperate to get some mobile phone connection and to work out what had happened to their family, friends elsewhere, to kind of try and plan their lives. But I think this is becoming increasingly dangerous for civilians there. The Russians have kind of regrouped and are kind of also determined to not let the Ukrainians get too comfortable in Kherson, get too, too far in rebuilding Kherson. And we're already seeing civilian casualties going up, especially people living close to the river are now having to really think twice about their safety. There are calls to evacuate Kherson, not only because of the danger from Russia, but also because of the absence of power, the absence of water. So far, we didn't get any sense people were heeding those calls. Quite the opposite. People were coming back to Kherson in spite of those attacks, but that situation may now change. As for the east, I think that was the logical conclusion or the kind of consequence of Russia pulling out of the west bank of the Dnipro River, taking forces from the south of Ukraine and putting them in the east, where things, it has to be said, haven't changed a great deal since the beginning of this war. This was the section of Ukrainian territory where the fighting had been going on since 2014, where the Ukrainians had very good defensive positions, kind of trench warfare, First World War style, all very, very immobile. And now the Russians, desperate for some kind of success, some kind of progress, to show their bosses in the Kremlin, throwing a huge amount of tech, but also soldiers at those front lines, often very badly prepared, badly trained Russian Russian newly mobilised soldiers, and a sense that the Russians really need something to show for all the losses of the recent weeks.
And this follows weeks of attacks on the country's civilian infrastructure. We saw the pictures there of the blackouts and water shortages. How are people coping?
It is pretty amazing, given how difficult things are here and how many kind of curveballs ordinary Ukrainians have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, how calm people are. There is no panic, there is no sense of people kind of thinking about themselves here in Kiev, behind, a couple hundred kilometres from the front lines, and kind of feeling sorry for themselves. Yes, life is getting difficult. Yes, it's very difficult to plan. Just a few weeks ago we had timetables and there were kind of scheduled power cuts so people could plan when to wash, when to cook, when to do other stuff. But for now, it is definitely getting more difficult. You can see behind me it is very cold. Winter has finally arrived after a very warm and long autumn, and now people are having to kind of think twice about maybe moving out of the city to, if they have a country house somewhere where they can, heat with wood, heat with coal, maybe cook their food over a fire, over some kind of gas cooker. If you're in a kind of 12-storey apartment building where everything is dependent on electricity for water heating, for cooking, everything, that is going to be very difficult. But for now, there is a sense that also the kind of energy system has held up. They haven't kind of sustained any kind of permanent damage, and there isn't any kind of total chaos. It's just a question of kind of working out how many hours a day to give different parts of Ukraine, and then hopefully they say within a day or two we'll get back to some kind of normality here in Kiev.
Thank you for that, Nick. Nick Connolly in Kiev. Meanwhile, NATO leaders are taking sides in a debate over whether Germany should send Patriot defence systems to Ukraine. Germany proposed sending the missiles to Poland after 2 people there were killed by a stray Ukrainian missile. Now, Warsaw welcomed the offer initially, but now says the US-made systems should go to Ukraine. Germany has declined the suggestion. But the issue has rekindled a debate amongst NATO states about arming Ukraine. Here's this Estonia's defence minister.
Well, we all know that Ukraine needs their defence. Doesn't matter who gives it and when. So as soon as we can give more air defence to Ukraine, the better it is. And so simple is that. So because, but not only air defence, also heavy artillery is much awaited. It's already better with winter equipment, winter gears, clothing. But yes, we all know that it's not a secret that Ukraine needs their defense. We have seen how many missiles Russia has launched towards Ukraine. So when there is a possibility to find additional help to Ukraine, it's much awaited.
Let's bring in political correspondent Matthew Moore. Welcome, Matthew. So Germany has these Patriot missiles that they want to send somewhere. And this is now a subject for debate amongst German politicians.
Yeah, that's right, Phil. I think some here in Berlin are wondering, why has this become a debate? Because this began as an offer made in good faith to help Poland following that stray missile crash, and it was to help Poland shore up gaps in its air defences. And so Poland's suggestion to send them to Ukraine has caught some here by surprise. It caught many kind of off guard. And the feeling here in Berlin is that it's kind of Poland playing politics with the issue, that Poland is pandering to a domestic audience by suggesting to send these on to Ukraine because it knows that it's going to cause a headache for the government here in Berlin. And it's triggered a debate here with some influential politicians in the coalition party saying, hold on, this is a good idea, actually. Germany, perhaps NATO should start delivering Patriot missile systems to Ukraine. But I asked the defence minister yesterday, German defence minister yesterday, and she said, this is not a decision for Germany to make unilaterally. This is a decision that would affect NATO members entirely. And so it's a NATO membership decision, really, that it has to be decided amongst NATO allies.
So tell us more then about these missile systems, these Patriot missile systems. What is it about them that makes them so contentious?
Yeah, well, you have to remember that Germany and its other NATO countries have sent high-tech air defence systems to Ukraine in recent months. Systems that can be used independently and operated independently by Ukrainian forces. And why the Patriots, while they've been kind of high on the Ukrainian wish list for a while, why they've not been sent and why they're so contentious is because it would essentially involve... Their Patriots are embedded in the NATO defence system, and it would essentially involve giving Ukraine de facto NATO protection. And that's seen as it could be perceived as granting kind of too much protection to Ukraine, and also kind of NATO membership light in a way, that it might risk escalating matters, it might risk provoking Vladimir Putin and raising the stakes. And so that's why it's seen as it should be a NATO decision as a whole and not one for Germany to make. And I think this has kind of caused a bit of frustration here in Berlin with the Poles suggesting that they could just send these Patriot missiles over the border to Ukraine without it being a major problem. It's worth mentioning at this stage that Poland has its own Patriot missile systems. So some people kind of maybe ask the question, could Poland send itself Patriot? Could they send Patriot missiles to Poland unilaterally? But the fear generally is that you cross a red line, Phil.
Thanks for that, Matthew. Political correspondent Matthew Moore.